It was 2 o'clock in the morning. I stood up, picked up my shoes, walked into the street, took a taxi, and went to the Globos, a cabaret on Insurgentes Avenue where many people, actors and actresses, painters, writers, singers, politicians, drug dealers, prostitutes, and so forth, went after hours to eat and dance. A Puerto Rican band was playing. The moment I entered the place, my sense of freedom vanished into thin air. I felt like an extraterrestrial who, after a long interstellar voyage, arrives in a prison. The dancers seemed like galley slaves going through their motions, smoking their tobacco and marijuana, ingesting their alcohol, cocaine, and pills, aware of only this tiny sliver of time and space. They seemed like walking corpses that wore masks of immortality and were chained to a deafening rhythm, accepting the world that was offered to them and swallowing it whole, imitating each other, devouring each other, carrying a burden of limitations that were transformed into solid identities. This ceiling, with its cement stalactites, blocked any possible vision of the dance of the myriad stars above. The consciousness of these people was opaque, and in reality each of them was tragically alone in the midst of this false festivity, sporting their sunglasses, their phallic pistols. I saw nothing but swollen mouths and breasts, a herd of animals driven by thirst for money, power, and fame. I found a waiter, tipped him, and asked him to loan me a pair of scissors. I locked myself in the bathroom and cut off all my hair. I returned to the Zendo with shaven head, but Ijo Takata had not moved. As I entered, he slowly murmured, without lifting his eyes from the ground. Master Uman said, "The world is so vast. Why, at the mere sound of a bell, do you don the clothes of a monk?" I removed my shoes, pants, coat, and shirt and put on a black robe that was hanging on a hook, taking my place on the meditation cushion. I recited the response I had learned by heart. When the king calls for us, we go immediately, without waiting for a coach. When our Father calls our name, we answer without hesitation. As I pronounced these words, I experienced a strange acceleration of thought in this insight. To be free in a world so vast does not mean taking advantage of its many options. My freedom means to be who I am, and at that moment I was a monk. Having responded without hesitation to my inner bell, I had no reason, sitting in this cramped room, to feel like I was a slave of this master before me. Ijo murmured with satisfaction, "The branches of all trees hold the same moon." At that instant, it began to rain in torrents. On the roof, the drops rebounded with a deafening noise. Raising his voice in order to be heard over the den, Ijo gave me another koan. Master Kyosho asked a monk, "What is that noise outside?" The monk answered, "The sound of rain." Kyosho commented, "People live in immense disorder. They blind themselves by pursuing material pleasures." The monk asked him, "And you, sensei?" Kyosho replied, "I can understand myself almost perfectly." The monk asked him, "What does it mean to understand yourself perfectly?" Kyosho declared, "To awaken is easy. To explain it with words is difficult." According to the secret book, the disciple resolves this koan by hissing to imitate the sound of the rain. Will that also be your response? I did not reply. Instead, I arose, went outside, and allowed myself to be drenched by the rain. I returned to my meditation, dripping wet, as if nothing had happened. Ijo gave a sigh of pleasure. Clearly, he had accepted my return to complete the remaining 72 hours of the Rohatsu. Due to lack of sleep and fatigue, my brain was functioning as if under the influence of a strong drug. The rapidity of my thoughts had a delirious energy. As soon as the master had given me that koan, I understood it in the same way that an explorer borne aloft by a condor understands the valley below, where he has previously walked. I was at once Kyosho, the obtuse master, and also the disciple who understands the koan by imitating the sound of rain. When the master asks about the sound outside, he sets a trap for the monk, who falls into it by answering intellectually. For Kyosho, there is no outside or inside. Because he is awake, that is, living in reality, he knows that the monastery where they are meditating is not separate from the universe, which is one. The monk feels that he is meditating in the limits of a protected, sacred space. For him, the 10,000 things of the world are separate outside, like the sound of the rain. For the master, the noise of the rain arriving is that of the whole world, inseparable from the eternal and infinite cosmos. He tries to indicate this to the monk by speaking of the millions who live in forgetfulness of the spiritual quest. The two of them are meditating amidst all of us. This is why he omits any mention of the rain itself in his seemingly absurd commentary. How could I have understood all of this without verifying it by my visit to Globos? I believed I had escaped the frivolous absurdity of such cabarets, freeing myself from trivial material pursuits by plunging myself in meditation in the Zendo with Ijo. Yet, Kyosho showed me that no one escapes anything. We live in a world that includes an ocean of minds that are asleep. To be conscious is to become the eyes of this blind world. When the monk asks, "And you, sensei?" he shows that he still does not understand. He still separates the world of materialism from the world of the master who is free of desire. With great patience, Kyosho explains, I can understand myself almost perfectly. Who is this self? A limited individual? Not at all. This self is all of humanity, the entire cosmos, and that which gives it life. The almost refers to the limitation of the human point of view, which is necessarily subjective and imperfect. Perfection can be only divine. Humanity, including all matter, permanently impermanent, can only approach perfection. But the monk stubbornly persists, trying to grasp everything with intellect and words instead of direct perception. What does it mean to understand yourself? It means precisely to see beyond words, allowing yourself to fall into the abyss of the unthinkable. Kyosho administers the coup de grace by pointing out that awakening is easy, but putting it into words is difficult. The disciple imitates the rain, leaving behind the prison of intellect to plunge into the natural phenomenon so that it reaches all the way to the heart. We continued the Rohatsu. After 2 hours, my body temperature began to rise. My rope dried little by little, emitting a slight cloud of vapor. With tenacious will, I strove to prevent words from distracting my mind, but each time I seemed about to succeed, the absurd words I'm about to succeed spoiled it. So I chose a word at random, Gorisapo, meaning tadpole. I repeated it endlessly in my mind for a time that seemed an eternity. Even during the 40 minutes of sleep, I hung on to the Gorisapo as if it were a life buoy. When Ijo woke me, I did not wait for him to shake me, but resumed my sitting position quietly, straightening my spine, lifting the corners of my lips slightly, and disintegrating the word Gorisapo with a mind that was finally empty. It was a moment of absolute peace, though it was quite brief, unfortunately. As soon as I ceased to produce thoughts, my heart filled the vacuum with loud beating, like a drum resounding in my chest. A slow, pulsing flood began to beat in my temples, the tips of my fingers, my genitals, my calves, my gums, my tongue, my feet. Everything was flooded with this reverberating rhythm. Ultimately, there was not a single part of my body where it could not be felt. Then I felt the constant ebb and flow of my blood circulating. To this was added the song of air moving back and forth from my sinuses to my lungs. Finally, there came the incessant gurgling of my digestive tract. Perhaps it was an auditory hallucination, but I then began to sense that even beyond what was happening in my body, everything that was around me emitted a sound. The floor, the roof, the walls were vibrating, as were the zafus, clothes, everything. Different tones and rhythms joined together in a chorus that sounded like the sound of a beehive. This sensation extended to include the noise of the city outside, and then the earth, the air, the sky. It was such a colossal impression that I began to tremble and felt as if I would faint. At this point, Ijo shouted, "Don't fall. Recite the 4 vows along with me. Though sentient beings are numberless. Though sentient beings are numberless, I vow to save them all passions, even the inextinguishable ones. I vow to extinguish them. All dharmas. What are dharmas, Ijo? Even if you don't understand, be quiet and repeat after me. All dharmas, though infinite and in number, I vow to fulfill. All truth, though immeasurable, I vow to attain." I repeated everything after him. He recited them again and again, louder and louder. Though I followed suit, he shouted constantly, "Say it louder!" Finally, I was shouting as loud as I could, but he urged me on, "Louder!" I felt that my vocal cords would burst. My shouting felt like vomiting, but he was still not satisfied, and I began to despair. Seized by a fit of rage and screaming like a madman, I threw my zafu at him. It bounced against his chest, but he did not flinch, continuing to repeat the vows and demanding that I repeated them louder. Seeing red, I leaped at him, intending to throw him to the ground. I don't know whether it was hallucination or the effect of this extreme fatigue, but I could not budge him so much as an inch, though I was shoving him with all my strength. It was as if I was pushing against a stone statue planted in the ground. I even drew back and rushed at him several times, but he was imperturbable. I let out a final yell, so loud that a piece of plaster fell from the wall in pieces. Then I collapsed, empty. At first, Ijo did not cease his recital, but soon he stopped, took a stick, and struck a small bell. Now at last you have succeeded in shouting with both halves of your brain and with all your guts. Before, you were doing it with only one hemisphere. That is how koans are resolved. And now it is midnight. The Rohatsu is over. Sleep until tomorrow. I fell like a feather into an abyss. When I awoke, sunbeams were filtering through the window. Machiko entered, bringing me a cup of coffee and some sweetbreads, smiling. She spoke in her rudimentary Spanish. Sleep 14 hours. You come down, take breakfast. Ijo wait you. You go to Oaxaca.